I will try to express what's on my mind. I know that there is a higher will and a higher intelligence that we call God. And that's what I identify as myself, this empirical individual that you see and that I see, has a limited intelligence and a limited will and a limited consciousness and knowledge of self. And I don't know who speaks when I say I, because I have a transcendental self, to speak like philosophers, but also I think of myself as an empirical individual, this individual with my story, my psychology, my wickedness, my flaws. And the higher will and the higher intelligence, that which we call God, if I tried to think what this God might think of my empirical self, I don't know, but what my empirical self thinks about my empirical self is that I feel like a failure and an embarrassment because I am limited. I am flawed, I am wicked, I am prejudiced, I am biased, I am evil, I have darkness and negativity within me, and as an empirical individual I have tried to model my thoughts on Hegel, but for an empirical self like me, I have an IQ broadly of 131. That's way higher than the majority of world population, but if I try to imagine what I represent myself as the historical individual Hegel, whose existence is dubious, but his IQ was probably 170 minimum, maybe more. He had training in theology. He was a trained philosopher. He discussed with the highest, most brilliant minds of his generation. And my empirical self, this individual, thinks that I have to imitate Hegel, and if I don't, I'm a failure. But how could I not fail? I will speak about my empirical consciousness, because my empirical consciousness does not know how to transcend as of now. In my days, I experience in the same day, sometimes in just 1 hour or a couple of hours, a broad range of emotions. I can feel anxious, frightened. I experience fear, and then anger, arrogance, and then joy, amazement, admiration for Hegel mostly. And when I try to think about any topic, there are so much contradictions and conflicts within my limited mind. I think about one thought and then the opposite thought, and I try to communicate because I feel guilty. And I want to punish myself for my own wickedness, I guess. But if I were honest with my empirical self, I would say that cultural Hegelianism, I don't know who had this idea. Hegel would probably say it was spirit becoming conscious of itself. That's not. I thought that this would. If I try to praise my empirical individual, I would say, well, I'm not particularly smart. I have no special talent, but I had one idea: cultural Hegelianism. But then cultural Hegelianism implies that one has to understand Hegel, and Hegel says that basically whatever good idea that the empirical individual has is not his ideas, it's world spirit. So all the empirical individual has are bad ideas in the view of Hegel. So whoever thought about cultural Hegelianism, my empirical self thinks, well, that's a great idea. The totality of all philosophers, the totality of all religions, all mysticism, all spirituality, the totality of all modern pop culture, and eventually all culture, and the totality of world history, the totality of physics, chemistry, biology, anthropology, psychology, law, economics, sociology, history, geopolitics, technology, everything, the totality of world knowledge. Who would not be interested in at least some parts of the totality of world knowledge? It seems that as of now I'm the only person interested. And then I felt guilty because Christianity says that knowledge is a sin and that we should have remained ignorant in the Garden of Eden. So failure of communication and misunderstanding. The entity that I call God or Spirit, whatever, has tried to communicate with me through music, the news, and there were moments when I understood or thought I did, and then I misunderstood or I misbelieved, I and then I had ideas as an empirical individual drawn out of my own empirical experience, But then I started to read Hegel, and Hegel says the empirical individual is worthless. So I started to think, but my empirical individual existence is worthless. I have to read Hegel. But the more I understand Hegel, the more I understand my empirical existence. So the less I understand Hegel, because he says that the individual is worthless. So there's this conflict in me. I don't know what Hegel is expecting of me. Hegel is some sort of my super ego, who constantly reminds me of my failure and my mediocrity and my stupidity and my lack of will and my laziness. And I will stick to the plan, knowing that whatever I call a plan as an empirical individual contradicts the plan of the higher intelligent will. So whatever plan I try to implement thinking that it's a good plan, eventually it will fail. So whatever I do, I will fail as an empirical individual. I'm trying to do good, but it backfires. So whatever or whoever I am, it's difficult to be whatever or whoever I am. So yeah, it's difficult.